That's the big question. Someone is going to ask you some questions. And one of them is that every single day someone asks you, are you okay? At times we may feel we are not okay, but at some point we may not be okay and not know that we are not okay. And I mean mentally. When you face some difficulties, some challenges that you had to overcome, some trauma, then you may not be okay. This is Now Tell Us. I'm your host, Anthony Morore. Today we have a guest who is going to come and tell us about the importance of having these conversations, mental health conversations. His name is Erik DaRosa, and he's going to be here shortly. I want to remind you to please share this episode with all your friends. And if you have a question to do with mental health, please ask. If you have a comment to make, we love feedback. So please send that comment as we are going on. And now, without taking one more minute, I'll ask you to join me as we go together to meet our guest today, who is known as Erik DaRosa. Here we go. Hi, Erik.
Hi, Anthony. How are you? So great to be on the show today.
Yeah, good to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's funny. As before we were coming onto the show, we were chatting. You're in Athens and I'm in Colorado. And as I look out my window, we woke up this morning to a foot of snow. And so it may be April and spring on the calendar, but it is still feeling like winter here in Colorado.
Wow, that's beautiful. Here it's in spring, and we don't have much snow in Athens, so it's been dry for several weeks now. And yeah, at some times we have showers, and then the sun comes out.
Yes. Well, the sun is out now, but it's supposed to snow again tonight. We have so many seasons here in the spring in Colorado. It's hard to keep track.
Yeah, seasons and seasons. I was not used to that when I was growing up. I only knew that we had the rainy season and the dry season. Those were our two seasons where I come from.
Aha.
hmm Now, the big question, and I ask you, Eric, are you okay?
Yes, I am okay, and I
Good
like
to answer.
I like how you asked that question. And one of the things that on our podcast called From Survivor to Thriver, my co-host Mark and I talk about quite a bit is the importance of asking people
Mm-hmm.
in conversation, not only are you okay, but
Mm-hmm.
when we ask, how are you doing? What we really want to know is, how are you doing? And it's not, as I like to think about it, a closed ended question where
Okay.
somebody can simply say, I'm fine, I'm good, and walk away. But what we're really looking for is that true answer of, you know, I'm actually struggling a little bit today,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm not really feeling myself. And what we want in that open-ended question is for people to tell us how they're really feeling so that we can then sit back and listen. Because as we've seen in studies, as I found in my own personal journey, when we start having these conversations about mental health, it's really important to be able to share with people who are going to listen and who are not going to pass judgment. And the more and more that we can do that, the easier it will be to have conversations such as these. And the bigger the weight off of our shoulders will tend to feel over time.
Yeah, and it's very easy to pass judgment on people that you see for the first time, people that you see doing things that you would question. So you judge them and you come to your own conclusions on how you see people and how you perceive them.
So true. And I think what ends up happening is, and my therapist has been a great reminder of this for me and my wife and others, is when we judge before we truly listen, we don't understand what is going on in that person's life, or what may be impacting that particular person on that particular day. And so taking things out of context and not really understanding the full story, it can be really damaging, and it can create rifts in people's relationships. It can create arguments. It can do a lot of damaging things. And so it is, as you said, it's really important that we take that time to step back and really, open our ears, kind of close our lips, and listen to what that person's saying to us.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know, because we see that you're passionate about this topic. How did it all get started with you?
Sure. So for a very, very, very long time, about 33 years, I struggled in silence. I was struggling with severe anxiety and OCD, and it was something that I never shared with anybody. And it was impacting my daily life through grade school and middle school and high school and college and into my work career in New York City. And it got to the point where I had a couple of dissociative episodes, are the technical term. Some call them psychotic breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And at 33 years old, I could no longer hold in that secret. I shared it with my wife, and she was very encouraging, and had me reach out and speak with a therapist. And it was at that point when I started to realize how important it was to speak out about what was happening with me, to
Mm-hmm.
share that not only with my wife, but with my friends, family members. And what I found is when I began to share that and I started to do the really difficult work, it felt like this tremendous weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. And so as time went on and we left New York City, we moved out here to Colorado, and I was introduced to a whole new group of friends. I realized right away that this was part of my story. And if people were going to get to know me at a real deep level, I wanted them to know exactly who I was. And so
Mm-hmm.
I started, sharing my story with them. And I found not only that it helped me to be able to share my own journey, but many people, when they found out that they weren't the only one, I wasn't the only one, they actually started sharing their stories with me. And so then we decided to take it even one step further. And in January of 2021, that's my co-host and I launched the From Survivor to Thriver podcast, which is all about shattering the stigma around mental health conversations and showing other people that they're not alone by having other real and relatable people come onto our show and share their own personal journeys.
Yeah, that's good. At some point, you mentioned OCD, and that could be a new term to us. What is OCD?
Sure, OCD. So people I know are very familiar with anxiety. They're familiar with depression. You hear things bipolar, schizophrenia. They're all different types of diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
Within the anxiety realm, also is called obsessive compulsive disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, that is when our thoughts in our brain end up in an endless loop. And we're unable to stop thinking about whatever that particular thought is. In many instances, and this is what happened with me, the way that OCD manifested itself in its obsessions were around intrusive thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And intrusive thoughts are typically unwanted thoughts that are very out of character for the person who's thinking about them. And sometimes they'll include, the fear of harming another person, the fear of dying. It's not at all grounded in reality. The difficulty is once the thought begins to surface in our brains, our immediate reaction is to want to push that thought away.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, and so then we become obsessed with it, and it's with us and kind of playing. It's like if you were listening to a record, a song that you didn't like, it's as though that song is just playing in your head nonstop and you can't get it out. What is associated with the obsessions are also what we call the compulsions. And
Okay.
those are the rituals or things that we will typically do to give us a sense or a feeling of control. So for instance, a lot of people have heard about people obsessively washing their hands,
Mm-hmm.
or obsessively turning light switches on and off,
Mm-hmm.
or checking the lock on the door when you leave the house, multiple times to make sure the door is locked.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, we're not doing those things because we're truly concerned that the stove isn't off, or we're concerned that our hands aren't clean. We're doing it because it gives us a sense of control
Mm-hmm.
over the thoughts which we otherwise can't control. And so OCD for me is something that really dominated my life for a very, very long time. And as we know with any mental health journey, it never truly ends, but we learn how to deal with it in a much healthier way.
Yeah. And is suicide included in here in OCD? You talked about thoughts of harming yourself. Does that include taking your own life? Also?
So
Mm-hmm.
so in my instance, and with the instances of many people that I've spoken to, that usually will not fall into the category of OCD.
Mm-hmm.
That ends up being more on the depression side and the self-harm side. It's often the fear of harming someone else.
Okay.
Usually somebody that you're very close to, a loved one. Uh, it's a thought that couldn't be any further away from the person who you truly are at your core. And that is what makes it so very terrifying.
Mm. Now comes the part of diagnosis. I have no clue how that one goes about. And many of the people listening or watching may not have an idea. Maybe they have a case in the family. Maybe themselves, they have some things that they sit down and reflect and see, and they say, no, this is not right. How does the diagnosis go about?
Sure. So for me, it was from working with my therapist.
Mm,
And when I first started seeing my therapist, I was 33 years old. And the initial conversations we had were all about dealing with the imminent crisis for me,
mm,
and ensuring through medication and through conversation that I was able to stabilize my condition.
mm,
Then what ends up happening is, through the observation of the therapist and the conversations that we're having, he was able to diagnose anxiety right away, and he was able to diagnose OCD right away.
mhm.
Because part of working with a therapist is having those open conversations and open dialogues.
Yeah.
And so I was very open with him about the things I was thinking about, how often I was thinking about them, the obsessions that I had, how if I didn't check the lock on the door 3 times, I felt like some awful thing was going to happen. And so right away, those things were the giveaways that I was suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder. So by working with a really good therapist, it's usually something that they can diagnose rather quickly.
Mm. Okay, now we get that. And now we come to the question of being vulnerable. And tell us your experience, and then tell us the experiences of other people who shared your story with you. Because It's one thing to say I'm hungry. It's another thing to say I'm not so well upstairs.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're absolutely it's true, and I really like that analogy that you just said
Mm,
because it, it doesn't take anything for people to look at someone else and say, "I'm hungry, let's go get lunch."
yeah,
Right? To 99.9% of the time, no one will judge you for being hungry.
yeah.
And going out to lunch, it's, it's fun, it's a social thing. But you're exactly right. Turning to somebody for the very, very first time and saying, I'm not feeling like myself.
Mm,
I'm struggling.
mhm,
Can be a very difficult and challenging thing. And you brought up the word vulnerability, and that's exactly what it is.
mm,
It's allowing ourselves to be completely vulnerable. It's usually around somebody that we know very well. Sometimes it can be for the very first time with a therapist or someone we haven't spoken to, and it can be difficult. But what I've actually found is, for me, over the course of my mental health journey, vulnerability has actually become about a superpower. And the more often that I'm vulnerable, the stronger I feel, and the stronger I feel, the more powerful I feel each time I tell that story.
mhm,
And rather than my mental health history and my diagnoses defining who I am, by being able to share that, and let other people know they're not alone and we're all in this together, it no longer defines me. And I would say to people, if you are feeling that something is off, something isn't right, something that I may have even mentioned around anxiety or OCD, or you're just struggling to get out of bed every day and feeling
mm,
like that you don't have, much purpose or drive, find someone. It can be a friend, a loved one, it can be a complete stranger, even if there are great Facebook groups now, and find someone that is not going to pass any judgment and is there to listen.
mhm,
Because when you share that story, as I had mentioned earlier, it really feels like a giant weight has been lifted.
yeah.
And as you were asking, I found, as I've shared my story more with people, other people are more and more willing to tell me their story or stories of other people in their family.
Mhm,
And it's been really interesting. It's, through a combination of the podcast and public speaking that I do and social media content, I'll have people stop me in the supermarket, or stores, and come up to me and say, hey, I bet you didn't know that I had, bipolar, or I just wanted to thank you for, episode such and such, because it really allowed me to think about what was happening in my own life, or, one of my kids is struggling, and your story has been very helpful in showing me some steps that we might be able to take to get them treatment. And so, being vulnerable really gets that conversation going. And the more conversations we can have, the bigger the community gets. It's kind of like building a house, putting the foundation in brick by brick, and the more solid and the more stable the foundation gets, the easier it becomes for people to start sharing that. And my hope is someday it'll be as easy to turn to somebody and say, hey, I'm not doing well,
mm,
just as we say, hey, you know what, I'm hungry, let's go and get lunch.
mm. Thank you for that. And I like the fact that at some point I mean, not once, severally, you're mentioning about this journey that you are on. And as we know, a journey has its valleys, hills. In other words, through your journey, I believe you've had some ups and downs, and you said it's a never ending journey. So, how have they been, your ups and downs?
Thank you for asking that. And your description is absolutely right. It's a never ending journey.
Mm,
I call a healing journey very fluid. It's like a river, and sometimes the river is very straight. Sometimes there's a rock in the way, and then the water needs to part around the rock as it continues on its journey to wherever it's emptying out. And so there's always challenges,
mhm,
and challenges to overcome, challenges to push through. And yes, so for me, there have been parts of my journey which have been very challenging. And there have been parts of my journey where I've been able to push through and break through and actually move to a much higher place and a better place and a more joyful place in in my journey. And I think what gets very difficult for those of us who are on these mental health journeys is very early on, we often think because I'm doing the work for the first time with my therapist and I'm sharing my story, or I'm on medication, or I'm doing some other type of treatment modality, that once I start to feel better, I'm healed. And the reality is, it is not like a physical injury where we break a bone and 6 weeks later we're out of a cast and we're walking and we're fine.
mhm,
The reality is we learn to live with and manage whatever our mental health struggles are. And when done correctly, we can actually become stronger people by
mm,
really understanding it, seeing and feeling the warning signs, and being able to talk to people about it. I found that when I do have kind of those valleys, as you mentioned, nowadays I speak up about it very quickly
mhm,
so that I don't allow it to get to a place where I might be going into a psychotic break, um, where it may not be as damaging not only to my mental health but also to my physical health. And so that's been a very important piece for me. But each time that I do encounter these valleys, I do look for other ways to complement things that I'm already doing in my own healing journey. And so I can share with your audience in my last kind of valley was in the fall and winter of 2021.
mhm,
And during that time, I recognized that a lot of the things that I was already doing were helpful, but that I needed to add some more. And so I added in some Eastern medicine treatment, so some mindfulness and meditation and some Reiki, and I combined that with my Western medicine therapy, with my talk therapy with my therapist and my medication. And for those who know me, skiing is a very big part of my life. And
mhm,
so being in the outdoors and being in nature and sliding around on the snow and in a beautiful environment is also very healing. And then I I played music as well, and so playing guitar and figuring out and combining which of those I needed at certain points in time. Uh, it allowed me to to heal in a different way. I would
mhm.
say in a more holistic way. And here I am. It's April of 2023, and I like to tell people I am a far better version of my former self.
That's good. It's good to hear that you're a better version of your former self. And you talk about now the therapy and the medicine. So that's trying to work on it and improve on your journey. But I have, and I'm thinking those valleys. What could be some of the triggers? And I know this could be different for different
Mhm.
types of the condition. But what could be some of the triggers of the conditions?
Sure. So, and I can, as you said, I can only speak for me and kind of what those triggers are for me.
Mm,
A very, very big one is stress.
mm-hmm,
And so, and that's a big trigger, I would say, in general, when it comes to mental health issues, is
mm-hmm,
stress. And so for me, when I'm constantly working and I'm not taking a break, and one day rolls into the next, uh, what happens is I forget about my own self care routines. I forget to go skiing or I forget to go mountain biking. And then suddenly a week or two has gone by and I'll feel myself feeling very out of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Another big trigger for me, and this dates back to my childhood and where my anxiety and my obsessive compulsive disorder started, is during times of change.
Mm-hmm.
And so when big changes are happening in my life, whether it be getting a new job, whether it be moving from one state in the US to another, that creates a lot of uncertainty for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so the uncertainty then leads to a sense of not feeling safe and secure. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, when I don't feel that I'm safe and secure, that can trigger OCD for me. It can trigger anxiety, and it can create that loop going on endlessly. So I would say those are usually for me kind of the two biggest ones. And now that I'm aware of that, before those types of events happen, or before I allow myself to go a week or 2 weeks without doing other things in my life that are good for me, I'll prepare myself and I'll say, wait a second, this is coming up and happening in a couple of months. And so then I'll work with my therapist and we'll come up with some type of plan on how we're going to prepare for that in advance. Or I'll look at my schedule and I'll plan more carefully how many meetings I have in a particular day, or when I'm traveling and how frequently I'm traveling. And so it's all about being aware. In the past, I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of what was happening to me, and I also wasn't aware of the triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I can much better prepare for those things. I just saw a question come in from a good friend of mine, Wizzy, and yes, I am wearing your Minds Anonymous hoodie. So it's a good friend, Wizzy Magnuson, and she has an amazing website called Minds Anonymous, where you can submit anonymous stories about your own mental health journeys. And she has been a guest on our podcast, and so I would recommend to all of your listeners out there to go check out her website. She does some really amazing things.
Wow, that's cool. And thank you for coming, Wizzy. We thank you for hopping on and contributing to this conversation. Now, um, thinking you've met with a lot of people, and each and every one of them has their unique story, which could have been an interesting conversation in this regard that you like sharing, or you keep thinking and remembering. If it's shareable, which has it been?
So for me, one of the things that's been amazing is, with the podcast and then public speaking and traveling, as you said, meeting all of these amazing people. And I use the word amazing because that's truly what they are. To be able to share your story publicly with somebody who you may have just met takes real courage and real vulnerability and real strength. And you mentioned that the stories are unique. And that's one of the things that I found, is that although there may be similarities, whether
Mhm.
they be similarities in diagnoses or similarities in childhood traumas or sexual traumas or addictions, each and every story is a fingerprint. And so there are parts of it that are very unique to that individual person. And just as I've learned so much about myself on my own healing journey by sharing these conversations with people, and Wizzy was one of those people, and she and I will message and text from time to time. uh, it's actually helped me with my own healing journey,
Mhm.
because I've learned things about other people that may actually pertain to things that I've been struggling with, but haven't been really able to put into words. And so I credit and thank everybody that I've come across in my own journey for helping me to grow as well. And it's been a pleasure and continues to be a pleasure to have a platform where I can allow other people to share those stories with the world, because it also helps them with their own healing journeys. And so, when I think back to, why we originally created our podcast, it was exactly that. It was about, we wanted to help people,
Mm,
and we wanted to show other people that they're not alone. And here we are, a little over 2 years in, and from the feedback I've received and from the conversations I've had, it appears to be that we are helping people as we set out to do, and being able to share those stories and move to their own greater places, moving more out of the valleys and more onto the mountaintops, as I look outside at some of the mountain peaks right outside my window.
mm. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. Up to this point, I believe that the listener and the viewer have already got the point that we are trying to spread, is that it's important to have these conversations with the people.
Yes, so it's so very important, and I can't stress it enough how important it is to have these conversations, and how important it is to be there for other people when they're struggling and listening, because each of us has our own struggles. Not everyone has mental health struggles to the degree that I have or that others have. But people also have daily struggles in their lives. And knowing that they can reach out to people and have those conversations, it makes it so much easier to be able to get through the day.
Hmm. Wow. And the journey continues. And we are wishing the best for you, Eric, as you keep on going, and for anybody
Thank,
else.
Thank you so much. And yes, it's a continuous journey, and I'm learning things every day. And as you said, and I'll reiterate that as well, I wish the best to all of your listeners out there, and anybody who's listening who may be struggling and thinking that they just can't seem to see the light, or they just can't seem to see that things are going to get better. I promise you, it does get better. There's hope and there's help, and there is definitely a way through, and there will be a brighter tomorrow.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. And what's in the future for you? Any plans of things to happen still?
Yeah, so for me, definitely, I'm going to continue, with the podcast and growing the podcast, and doing some more public speaking and getting involved in more things within the ski world, and helping people to be able to heal themselves through skiing and other outdoor activities, and uh, just becoming more and more of an advocate for those who may not yet have found their voice, or may not have even realized yet that they have a voice.
Okay, that's good. Now, we have people who might be listening and could be interested in knowing much more about yourself, or maybe following up and listening to your podcast. How would you advise them to find you?
Sure. Thank you for asking, Anthony. So the podcast is called From Survivor to Thriver. New episodes come out each and every Tuesday morning. You can find the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We have a Facebook page, which is called From Survivor to Thriver. It's an interactive page. And so besides just posting our podcast episodes and pictures and posts and motivational quotes, we welcome people to join us on that site, and share their thoughts and their feelings. And if there's any particular topics that they'd like to hear on the podcast, we welcome that as well. I'm also on Instagram. It's Erik, Erik DaRosa, DaRosa. And you can message me there. You can follow me there, and on Facebook as well, where this is being broadcast live as we speak. Again, it's Erik Erik DaRosa DaRosa.
Okay, they've had everything. And in case you didn't get that, you can always repeat this episode. You can reverse it and hear it better. All those links that you can get to connect with Erik. One of the links is in the description where you can go right to the podcast and listen to some episodes.
Terrific.
Yeah, and that's about it today at Now Tell Us with Erik DaRosa.
Anthony, I just wanted to say thank you so very much for having me on your show. And I hope that some of the things I shared today will help people in your audience. And as I mentioned earlier, I welcome anybody who's listening to please reach out. You can reach out to me through Facebook. You can reach out to me through Instagram. I'm always happy to hear and listen to your stories and be just an extra set of ears if you are feeling that there's nobody else that you can turn to.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Any final words that you would like us to always remember?
I will leave you with just the tagline that I use on my own show, which is to just remember it's perfectly okay to not always be okay.
Mm, it's perfectly okay to not always be okay. Perfectly okay. Did I miss it?
No, you did it exactly correctly.
Wow, thank you very much, Erik. It's been an honor having you on our show.
Thank you. It's been an honor being on as well.
Yeah, this has been Now Tell Us. I've been your host, Anthony Morore, and together with our guest today, Erik DaRosa, we're saying bye for now. It's perfectly okay not to always be okay. Bye.